I was just a child when I first heard about the well. It was one of those old, forgotten stories that only the oldest members of our small town seemed to know about. It wasn't something you could find in history books or local records. It was more of a ghost story, whispered around campfires or during sleepovers when the night was dark and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. The well, they said, was cursed. It stood deep in the woods on the outskirts of town, far from the well-worn paths that people usually took when they wanted a quiet walk through nature. The trees around it were older, their branches thick and twisted, casting deep shadows that seemed to move even when there was no wind. The ground was uneven, covered in roots that snaked out like fingers, as if the forest itself was trying to keep people away from that place. No one knew exactly when the well was built or by whom. Some said it had been there long before the town was founded, a relic from an earlier time when different people lived in these woods. Others claimed it was dug by a madman, obsessed with finding something that had been lost to the ages, something dark and powerful. As I grew older, the stories became more detailed, more sinister. They said that the well was a doorway, a portal to another world, a world that was twisted, where things didn't follow the same rules as our own. Some said that if you listened closely, you could hear voices coming from the depths of the well, whispering secrets and promises, luring people closer and closer until they fell in. But the most terrifying story was about the disappearances. According to the tales, people had been going missing in those woods for generations. Some were children who had wandered too far from home. Others were hunters or travelers who had gotten lost. The common thread in all the stories was the well. It was always there, waiting, hungry. My grandmother used to tell me those stories when I was younger. She was one of the oldest residents in town. Her memory sharp, despite her age. Her voice would drop to a whisper when she spoke of the well, as if she was afraid that something might hear her. "Don't go into those woods," she would say, her eyes wide and serious. "The well is dangerous. It takes what it wants, and once you're lost to it, you're gone forever." At the time, I didn't believe her. I thought it was just another one of those ghost stories meant to scare children. But as I got older, I began to notice things. Every so often, there would be news of someone going missing. A hiker, a camper, sometimes even a local who should have known better. And every time, people would whisper about the well. My parents didn't like me playing too close to the woods. We lived on the edge of town, our backyard sloping down into a dense forest. They had never told me exactly why they were so strict about it, but I always assumed it was because of the stories. They would always give me a stern look when I asked about the well, and my mother would quickly change the subject. But the stories fascinated me. I would often sit at the edge of the yard, staring into the trees, wondering if the well was real. My friends and I would talk about it sometimes, daring each other to go into the woods and find it. But none of us ever had the courage to actually do it. It wasn't until I was 17 that I finally decided to go looking for the well. It was a stupid decision, one made out of boredom and the arrogance of youth. I had just finished high school, and the summer stretched out before me, long and empty. My friends had all gone on vacation with their families, and I was left alone in the small, quiet town. The stories about the well had faded over the years, pushed aside by more pressing concerns. College applications, part-time jobs, relationships. But they were still there, lurking in the back of my mind, whispering to me when the nights were long and my thoughts were restless. One day, with nothing better to do, I decided to go into the woods. I told myself it was just a walk, that I wasn't really looking for the well. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The forest was dense, the trees tall and thick, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of moss and earth. As I walked, the ground became uneven, the roots of the trees snaking out like veins beneath my feet. I had been walking for about an hour when I noticed something strange. The sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of insects, had faded, leaving only an eerie silence. The trees around me seemed older, their bark dark and rough, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. And then I saw it. The well stood in a small clearing, surrounded by tall, thick trees that seemed to press in on all sides. It was made of stone, the rocks worn and weathered with age. Vines crawled up its sides, and the ground around it was bare, as if nothing dared to grow too close. Panic set in as I struggled to sit up, my heart racing in my chest. My hands searched the ground around me, feeling the rough stone walls of the well, but there was no way out. The walls were smooth and slippery, offering no handholds, and the opening above was just a small circle of light, far out of reach. I was trapped. But as the panic threatened to overwhelm me, I remembered the whisper, the voice that had called to me, luring me into the well. It had to be down here, somewhere in the darkness. And if it had brought me here, maybe it could help me find a way out. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I had no choice but to move forward, to find the source of the voice and hope it would lead me to safety. Slowly, I began to crawl through the darkness, my hands feeling their way along the cold stone floor. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the well, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The whisper was faint, barely audible, but it was there, guiding me. The passageway was narrow and low, forcing me to crawl on my hands and knees. The walls were damp and covered in a slimy substance that made my skin crawl. The air was thick with the smell of rot and decay, and I had to fight the urge to gag. Time lost all meaning as I crawled through the darkness. Minutes, hours, it could have been days for all I knew. The only thing that kept me going was the whisper, that faint, haunting voice that seemed to be leading me deeper and deeper into the earth. Eventually, the passageway began to widen, and I found myself in a larger chamber. The air was colder here, the darkness even more oppressive. But there was something else, an overwhelming sense of dread that made my heart race and my breath catch in my throat. I stopped, my body trembling with fear. I could feel it now, the presence of something in the chamber with me, something ancient and malevolent. The whisper was louder now, clearer, and it was coming from the center of the chamber. Slowly, I crawled forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The ground beneath me was slick with some kind of viscous liquid, and the smell of rot was almost unbearable. But I had to keep going. I had to find out what was in the well. As I reached the center of the chamber, I felt a sudden shift in the air, as if something was moving in the darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my heart racing with terror. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and twisted, its form barely visible in the faint light that filtered down from above. It was humanoid in shape, but there was something wrong about it, something that made my skin crawl. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid, like it was made of something that wasn't quite solid. The whisper grew louder, echoing in my mind, and I realized it was coming from the figure. It was speaking directly to me, its voice soft and seductive, promising me things I couldn't comprehend. But beneath the whisper, there was something else, a deeper, more sinister voice that sent shivers down my spine. It was darker, more malevolent, and it filled me with a sense of dread unlike anything I had ever felt before. I wanted to run, to scream, to get away from that thing, but I was frozen in place, my body refusing to obey my commands. The figure moved closer, its twisted form looming over me, and I could feel its cold breath on my skin. It spoke to me, its voice echoing in my mind, filling me with thoughts that weren't my own. It told me things, terrible things, about the well, about the darkness that dwelled within it. It showed me visions of a world beyond our own, a world of shadows and nightmares, where things that defied comprehension lurked in the darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. The whisper was gone, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed in on all sides. The chamber felt empty, hollow, as if whatever had been here had taken all the life with it. I was alone, trapped in the well, with no way out. I don't know how long I sat there in the darkness, my mind reeling from the encounter. My body ached, my head throbbed, and I could still feel the cold breath of the figure on my skin. But more than anything, I felt a deep, gnawing fear, a fear that I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding, something that could consume me whole. But I couldn't stay in the well forever. I had to find a way out. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I forced myself to stand. My legs were weak, trembling beneath me, and I had to lean against the wall for support. The chamber was silent, the oppressive darkness all-encompassing, but I couldn't let it consume me. I had to keep moving. I began to explore the chamber, my hands running along the rough stone walls. There had to be a way out, some kind of passage or tunnel that would lead me back to the surface. But the walls were solid, unyielding, and the floor was slick with that same viscous liquid that coated everything in the well. As I searched, I began to notice something strange. Carvings on the walls, barely visible in the faint light. They were old, ancient even, worn smooth by time and the elements. The symbols were unfamiliar, twisted and angular, like nothing I'd ever seen before. But there was something about them that felt wrong, something that made my skin crawl. The symbols seemed to shift and change when I looked at them, as if they were alive, writhing on the stone like serpents. I forced myself to look away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what the carvings meant, but I could feel their power, their malevolence. They were connected to the well, to the darkness that dwelled within it. I continued my search, my hands trembling as I felt along the walls. And then, just when I was about to give up, I found it, a small opening, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. It was hidden behind a curtain of vines, the entrance to a tunnel that seemed to lead deeper into the earth. I hesitated, fear gnawing at my insides. The tunnel was dark, the air thick with the smell of decay, and I had no idea where it led. But it was the only way out, the only chance I had of escaping the well. Taking a deep breath, I crawled into the tunnel. The walls were close, pressing in on all sides, and the air was stifling, making it difficult to breathe. The ground was uneven, the floor covered in thick mud that sucked at my hands and knees. But I pushed forward, driven by the desperate need to escape. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, winding deeper and deeper into the earth. The darkness was suffocating, and the silence was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. After what felt like hours, the tunnel began to widen, and I found myself in another chamber. This one was larger than the first, the ceiling high above, shrouded in darkness. The air was colder here, the smell of decay even stronger, and the ground was littered with debris, broken stones, old bones, and other things I didn't want to think about. But there was something else in the chamber, something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, carved from the same stone as the walls, and on the pedestal was a book, old and worn, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was adorned with more of those twisted symbols, the same ones I had seen carved into the walls of the first chamber. The book radiated power, a dark, malevolent energy that seemed to pulse in the air around it. I could feel it calling to me, beckoning me closer, whispering promises of knowledge and power, but I knew better than to trust it. I had already been lured into the well by the whisper, and I wasn't about to fall into another trap. I forced myself to look away, my eyes scanning the chamber for another exit. But the only way out was a narrow passageway on the far side of the chamber, almost hidden by shadows. I made my way toward the passage, careful not to get too close to the pedestal. The air seemed to thicken as I approached the book, the darkness pressing in on all sides. But I kept my focus on the passage, ignoring the whispers that filled the chamber. Just as I reached the entrance to the passage, I heard a sound behind me, a low, rumbling growl that sent shivers down my spine. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw something emerging from the darkness. It was a creature, twisted and grotesque, its form barely visible in the faint light. Its eyes glowed with a sickly green light, and its mouth was filled with jagged, razor-sharp teeth. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and the creature began to move toward me, its movements slow and deliberate. Panic surged through me, and I turned and fled down the passage, the growl echoing in my ears. The passage was narrow, the walls close, and the air was thick with the smell of rot. But I didn't care. All I could think about was getting away from that creature, from the well, from the darkness that seemed to be closing in around me. I ran for what felt like hours, my breath ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper and deeper into the earth. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Eventually, the passage began to slope upward, and I felt a glimmer of hope. If I was going up, that meant I was getting closer to the surface, closer to escape. But as I rounded a corner, I skidded to a stop. The passage ended in a dead end, the way forward blocked by a wall of solid stone. I stared at the wall in disbelief, my heart sinking. There was no way out. I was trapped. The growl echoed down the passage, closer now, and I could hear the creature's footsteps, slow and deliberate, as it made its way toward me. Panic set in, and I began to claw at the wall, desperate to find some way out. But the stone was solid, unyielding, and my fingers scraped uselessly against it. The growl grew louder, and I could feel the creature's presence behind me, its cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned, my back pressed against the wall, and saw the creature looming over me, its eyes glowing with that sickly green light. I was out of options. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And then, just as the creature lunged at me, something strange happened. The ground beneath my feet gave way, and I fell through the floor, tumbling into darkness. I awoke in a small, dimly lit chamber, my body bruised and battered from the fall. The air was cool and damp, and the walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with old, dusty books and strange, arcane objects. I was alive. Somehow, I had survived the fall, but I had no idea where I was or how I had ended up here. The chamber was silent, the only sound the faint dripping of water somewhere in the distance. The creature was nowhere to be seen, and I felt a small surge of relief. But I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find a way out. I pushed myself to my feet, wincing as pain shot through my body. My head throbbed, and my vision swam for a moment before I steadied myself. As I looked around the chamber, I noticed something strange. The books on the shelves were old, their pages yellowed with age, but they were in pristine condition, as if they had been untouched for centuries. The objects on the shelves were equally strange: skulls, jars filled with strange, glowing liquids, and other things I couldn't even begin to identify. There was an air of ancient knowledge in the chamber, a sense that this place had been hidden away for a very long time. But there was something else, something that made my skin crawl, a sense of malevolence, of dark power that lingered in the air like a foul odor. I cautiously approached one of the shelves, my eyes scanning the titles of the books. The language was unfamiliar, the letters twisted and angular, like the symbols I had seen carved into the walls of the well. But there was something about them that felt familiar, as if I had seen them before in a dream or a nightmare. As I reached out to touch one of the books, I felt a sudden surge of power, a jolt that sent shivers down my spine. The book was cold to the touch, its cover rough and worn, and as I opened it, I felt the darkness within it seep into my mind. The pages were filled with more of those twisted symbols, but as I stared at them, they began to shift and change, forming words that I could understand. The book was a journal, written by someone who had once lived in the town, long before it had become what it was today. The author spoke of the well, of the darkness that dwelled within it, and of the things they had discovered in their studies, dark, terrible secrets that had been forgotten by time. The author had been searching for something that had been lost in the well, a power that could change the world, a power that had been hidden away by those who feared it. But the author had also discovered the cost of that power, the price that had to be paid. The well, it seemed, was not just a portal to another world. It was a prison, a place where something ancient and terrible had been sealed away, something that had been forgotten by time, but had never truly been gone. The author spoke of the figure I had seen in the well, of the creature that had chased me through the passages. They were guardians, protectors of the darkness, bound to the well by the same power that had sealed it. But the author had also discovered a way to break that seal, a way to release the darkness and claim its power. The book spoke of rituals, of sacrifices, of things too terrible to comprehend. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to know anymore. I didn't want to be a part of whatever dark secret the well held. I had to get out of here. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something else on the shelf, a small ornate box, its surface covered in more of those twisted symbols. There was something about it that drew me in, something that felt important, like it held the key to escaping the well. I reached out and picked up the box, feeling the cold metal against my skin. It was heavier than it looked, and as I opened it, I saw a small, intricately carved key inside. The key was made of a strange, dark metal, and it seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. But there was something about it that felt familiar, like I had seen it before, in the visions the figure had shown me. I knew without a doubt that this key was important. It was connected to the well, to the darkness, to everything that had happened, and it was my only way out. Taking the key, I made my way to the only exit from the chamber, a narrow doorway that led into another passage. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the passage, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. The key was important, and I had to find out what it unlocked. As I moved through the passage, I began to notice something strange. The walls were no longer made of stone, but of something else, something organic, like flesh. The air was thick with the smell of rot, and I could hear the faint, distant sound of whispers, like the voices from the well. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper and deeper into the earth. The walls seemed to pulse and writhe, as if they were alive, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw it. A door set into the wall at the end of the passage. The door was made of the same dark metal as the key, and it was covered in those twisted symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. I knew, without a doubt, that this was the way out. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairway that led up into the darkness. The air was cold and damp, and the smell of rot was even stronger now, almost overpowering. But I didn't care. All I could think about was getting out of the well, escaping the darkness that had consumed me. I began to climb the stairs, my legs trembling with exhaustion. The steps were uneven, slick with moisture, and the walls were close, pressing in on all sides. But I kept going, driven by the desperate need to escape. As I climbed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with dark thoughts and terrible images. But I pushed them aside, focusing on the light that I could see at the top of the stairs, the faint glimmer of hope that I might make it out alive. The stairs seemed to go on forever, winding up and up, the darkness pressing in on all sides. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the top. I emerged into a small, circular chamber, the air cold and still. The walls were made of the same dark metal as the door, and in the center of the room stood a pedestal, identical to the one I had seen in the chamber below. On the pedestal was another book, its cover adorned with more of those twisted symbols. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the book. I didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know what dark secrets it held, but I knew I had no choice. I had to find out what the book said, had to know what I was dealing with. With a deep breath, I opened the book. The pages were filled with more of those twisted symbols, but as I stared at them, they began to shift and change, forming words that I could understand. The book spoke of the well, of the darkness that had been sealed away, and of the terrible power that lay within it. It spoke of the key, of the door that led to the heart of the well, and of the ritual that had to be performed to release the darkness. The ritual was terrible, requiring sacrifices and incantations too dark to comprehend, but it promised power beyond imagining, a way to reshape the world to one's own will. But there was a warning as well, a warning that once the darkness was released, it could not be controlled. It would consume everything in its path, leaving nothing but destruction and despair in its wake. I slammed the book shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want anything to do with the ritual, with the darkness, with the well. I just wanted to get out, to leave this place and never come back. But as I turned to leave, I heard a sound behind me, a low, rumbling growl, like the one I had heard in the passage below. I turned, my heart racing, and saw the creature from the well emerging from the shadows, its eyes glowing with that sickly green light. The creature moved toward me, slow and deliberate, its growl echoing in the chamber. I could feel the cold breath on my skin, the malevolent presence pressing in on all sides. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The door behind me was locked, the key nowhere to be found. I was trapped. The creature lunged at me, its jaws snapping shut inches from my face. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its teeth, and scrambled to the far side of the chamber. The creature turned, its eyes locked on me, and lunged again. This time, I wasn't fast enough. The creature's jaws closed around my arm, its teeth sinking into my flesh, and I screamed in pain. But as the creature bit down, I felt something strange. A surge of energy, a pulse of dark power that seemed to radiate from the book, from the key, from the well itself. The creature recoiled, releasing its grip on my arm, and I felt the energy coursing through me, filling me with a strength I had never known. I didn't know what was happening, didn't understand the power that was flowing through me, but I knew I had to use it, had to fight back. With a roar, I lunged at the creature, my hands glowing with that same sickly green light. The creature howled in pain as my hands made contact, and I felt the energy surging through me, burning through the creature's flesh like fire. The creature writhed and twisted, its body contorting in pain, but I didn't let go. I could feel the power flowing through me, consuming the creature, burning it from the inside out. And then, with a final, agonized scream, the creature disintegrated into ash, leaving nothing but a faint green glow in its wake. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion. The power that had surged through me was gone, leaving me weak and drained. But I was alive. Somehow I had survived. As I lay there on the cold metal floor, I realized that I had escaped the well, escaped the darkness that had threatened to consume me. But I knew deep down that I would never be the same. The well had changed me, marked me in some way. The power that had saved me was still there, lingering just beneath the surface, waiting to be called upon. And I knew that one day I would have to face the darkness again. But for now, I was free. Free to leave the well, to leave the town, to leave the past behind. But as I stood up and made my way to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that the well wasn't done with me yet. The darkness was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when it did, I would be ready. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider